pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, I see we have the election of the chair and vice chair. Should we maybe, what is Mike Suarez, do we know? Is Mike coming?
I do not know.
So maybe
he's on his way.
So let's put that off until he's here, if we could, and go to public comment. You have 3 minutes. Do we have any speakers at public comment? Okay, seeing none, maybe we could start our presentation now and deal with the other business later. So this is the U.S. Department of Transportation's Transit-Oriented Development Pilot Planning Program grant.
Hey, good morning, committee members. My name is Chris Cochran. I am the Director of Service Development here at HART, and I'm going to give you a overview of our latest competitive grant that we have been awarded from DOT. A very exciting opportunity here. So I will go ahead and jump right into it. In December, we were awarded $800,000 for a competitive grant opportunity as part of a transit-oriented development pilot program. There were 28 agencies throughout the country that were awarded. We were obviously one of them. Florida was the awarded 3 grants in the program. We're the only state in the country that was awarded 3 grants. PSTA and Jacksonville were the others in Florida as well. So we're very fortunate to be a part of this esteemed group that was awarded this opportunity. Primarily, this pilot program focuses on the FTA's mission of kind of improving the connection of public transit and communities and providing opportunities here to integrate land use and transportation opportunity through planning with new fixed guideway projects and core capacity investment projects. The fixed guideway projects that are that were applied for in this project are related to the streetcar extension within the city limits of Tampa, as well as the upcoming arterial BRT study that HART is running that will look at the Tampa, Nebraska, and Fowler corridors for BRT transit improvements along that corridor, and you'll be hearing more about that particular one in the next month or so. So essentially the project scope here is really to examine and evaluate the current performance of existing land use policies within these corridors and how they are either working or not working, and how they can be better integrated into these corridor projects to really focus on promoting economic development, promoting transit-oriented development at proposed station sites in these corridors, but also look at station planning policy as far as what the stations might look like, creating methodologies, something consistent across the board that can be applied throughout the county, throughout the city, and the region as well. Essentially how this scope will work is in 3 phases. The first phase will focus on the Tampa streetcar corridor and the proposed station areas that lie within that corridor, and essentially the policies that currently exist around those proposed station areas, and really look at how those policies currently work or don't work in relation to promoting economic development, safety, transit promotion, and better transit ridership around these areas. All of those things are taken into consideration. Those same considerations will be looked at in phase 2. However, it will be focused on the arterial BRT study, specifically on the Florida and Nebraska corridors only. And then the third phase will be focused on the BRT study in the Fowler section, which runs east-west between Florida, Nebraska, and the USF area. The project goals and timelines here, again, really the project goal here is to establish this consistent methodology of using sort of a form-based and transit-based development initiatives to really create good and workable policy and regulatory framework for the creation of these station area plans and transit-oriented development regulations for the future that can really help promote better uses of these station area plan areas that will really garner better transit ridership, better connectivity for the communities, good economic development. Again, that's always sort of the staple of these TOD opportunities. The project timeline's approximately 33 months to complete. We do have a 3-year window for this grant. We don't anticipate using all of that. We will likely be starting the kickoff here in the next week or two for this. And as part of that, there will be a thorough public outreach process for each phase along the way. So there will be analyses done in phase 1 and then a public outreach portion of that. There will be, for each phase, we will do extensive public outreach for it. And then a consultant will also be competitively bid for, procured for this project to help us along the way. The project deliverables, what we're looking for is essentially an analysis report for the viability of existing future land use as well as existing development regulations regarding TOD along these defined corridors, and making recommendations for modifications of regulations that would better support these TOD opportunities in both the corridors and the region as a whole. In addition, we're looking at an analysis report on existing station area design criteria and recommendations for modifications that would enhance, more TOD opportunities in the corridors and region as well. And finally, we're looking for the development of a regulatory framework which will promote market-based development opportunities in these defined corridors and region as well. With me today, I have we have Anthony Garcia from the Planning Commission, as well as Ms. Catherine Coyle from the City of Tampa, who are both much more the experts on this subject matter than I am. So if you have any questions that I can't answer myself, I'm going to have them come up and speak a little bit more in detail about the land use policy and regulations. So,
I have a question. I understand the city and county's role in this process, but what is it from HART that we're expecting to get out of this? I mean, we don't have the regulatory authority to change the land development code. So what is it that HART is going to do as part of this process?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that as we HART is, for the purposes of particular to this study, when we look at the Tampa Arterial BRT study, which will run in the Florida-Nebraska corridor and Fowler, that is our project. And we will be the ones seeking funding for that project. We'll be the ones constructing creating the public-private partnerships for the station locations. It will be our study that makes the recommendations for where those station locations will be. So it's very important that we work closely in partnership with the city and the Planning Commission to ensure that what we are doing coincides with how the policies and future land use work for us together. And so, and just to clarify, as a complete partnership for this project, it is the MPO, the Planning Commission, the City of Tampa, and HART. All four of us are partners on this project.
The county isn't involved in this?
No, sir.
Oh, that's interesting.
You had a question?
Oh, I guess my first question is should we stop real quick and elect the officers, or if not, I'll just have a question, that's fine. So with regards to just physically how this works, you mentioned the phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 of the study. You mentioned a kickoff and a scope. So do we have a written scope and that you can share with us?
Yes, we do. That I can send out make sure we send out the grant application with the scope summary.
Okay.
That was part of the application. I apologize you didn't receive that in advance.
So is the thought, so with regards to the phase 1 and phase 2, this is the way you see bidding it out to a local consultant to do the work?
Yes,
Phase
sir.
1, 2, and 3, and then, so phase 1 and 2 is, like one phase is Florida, one's Nebraska, or it's like going from south to north is phase 1, and phase 2 gets us to Fowler, and phase 3 gets us to the university, or what, how exactly is that phasing?
So phase 1 will be focused on the streetcar extension only,
Okay.
and what is in that plan. So that will be worked closely with the city.
Right.
Certainly HART will work with them. There is expectations of there being an overlap with the BRT study and the northern portion of that extension. So, but phase 2 and phase 3 are focused on the BRT study solely.
Okay.
The first phase being the north-south portions of Florida and Nebraska, and then phase 3 being Fowler on its own, separately.
Okay, and so when we say there will be a kickoff soon, that means a kickoff and bidding it out to hire a consultant, or what exactly does that
It
mean?
will be a kind of a strategy meeting for us to meet with all of our partners and establish a timeline and how we want the solicitation process to go, establish our evaluation criteria, and really sort of make sure that we are all on the same page before we put this solicitation out.
So with regards to the 4 corners of the grant, the area that we're studying, then that whole area is just within the incorporated city of Tampa?
Yes, actually it is.
Okay. And there's no scenarios where, and I can't say I'm exactly familiar, but where you end up north of the VA or something where you end up in the county?
No.
Okay.
The Tampa arterial BRT study, we left the northern end of it a little vague as to where the study can end. Really
Right.
not, because we didn't exactly know where there may be recommendations for the intermodal center up there. We assume it's going to be around the University Mall. But part of that study is making a recommendation as to where it should end, and potential connectivity to other modes up there, and our own existing center where the University Area Transit Center is right at the veterans there as well. So that will all, that ending point will be part of the study, making a recommendation as to where that ends.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Garcia, can I ask you a quick question? You know, when I say a quick question, you know that's not what I mean. It's going to be one question.
Of course.
As you know, we had a TOD committee about 5 or 6 years ago when I first got on HART, and we talked a lot about how TOD actually works in relation to transit agencies. And a lot of times we miss the point of what role the transit agency plays in both directing development and also owning land that may be used as a lease that then gets built by a developer. One of the discussions we had when we talked about the east-west corridor, whether it was Platte or Cleveland, one of the things you told me is that we didn't have enough available land that could be part of a TOD development, meaning empty land, things that have not been developed. Do you feel that the north-south with Florida and Nebraska corridors has more than enough of those kind of developable parcels to make a more successful either BRT or other fixed guideway system going north?
Tony Garcia with the Planning Commission. In response to your question regarding specifically the Nebraska-Florida corridors, which is ones I think you're specifically relating to, There are a finite amount of properties. I think the biggest problem in doing analysis in the Seminole Heights, greater Seminole Heights area, one of the difficulties you're going to have is in parcel assemblies. There's a lot of small parcels along those particular corridors. So there will be some degree of difficulty. It also is going to be predicated on the type of corridor station, on the type of station you're going to want to go ahead and develop. Most of these are going to be neighborhood stations. We have a hierarchy of stations within the comprehensive plan right now that you can look at that tells you to what degree of density and intensity you would need to have a certain type of station in the area. So I think the number of stations you're going to need and the type of station that you're going to want there is probably going to be, I would guess, the neighborhood station primarily that's going to be the one that's going to be tapped. But I think there needs to be some further analysis to see what can be done as far as legitimately being able to have parcel assemblies that would result in the creation of some of the stations that you would be wanting to place along those corridors.
What size do you usually see for a neighborhood station versus a larger central station?
That has changed since we've actually developed the station plans. The station plans have already been in the plan in excess of 10 years. We're actually the first, Tampa was the first jurisdiction along with, well, Hillsborough County was the first county to go ahead and implement state TOD policies for the state of Florida back in the day. So, of course, before TOD,
right.
Something that was more of a conversation piece back in the day. But so I think that that's changed. I think it's going to be predicated on really what the analysis is going to come out to show in the ensuing 24 months. I know it's a 33-month project, but I think you're going to have a pretty good idea probably halfway through there. I think I'd like to go ahead and see what happens in the analysis, and most of the distances for a neighborhood station, you're talking about less than a quarter mile for most of the stations, okay, as far as what they're going to impact. It's going to be from a quarter to a half a mile. Normally you're going to go up to a half a mile if you have a station that's going to be like a community station or a regional station. So those are the areas that it's going to impact. But for a neighborhood station, you're really talking about maybe a 2 or 3 block radius. I'm going to say standard as a standard, 5-minute, 10-minute long.
And what do you see that we need to change on the county comprehensive plan or the city comprehensive plan in order to accommodate TOD? Do you think it's ready to go based on, I mean, obviously we have this planning grant that's going to be coming through to look at it in a more specific way. You know, we've had, as you mentioned, we've had things dealing with TOD, quote unquote,
right,
without by any other name. But yet, you know, what do you think we need to change in the comprehensive plan, both from the city side and, you know, obviously this planning grant's only for the city, it sounds like, based on what we've heard. What do you think we need to change and tweak to make sure that we're able to do TOD?
Well, I think there may just have to be some clarification as it relates to fixed guideway.
Mm-hmm.
We have definition for fixed guideway in the plan, but I think there may be some tweaking, but still not tweaking to make it a little bit more specific. We have a process that's outlined in the plan and the associated policies. So I think there may just have to be some clarification based on maybe some changes that have occurred nationally as it relates to TOD. I haven't had the opportunity to go ahead and see that. We haven't really revisited the TOD policies in a while, so it would really be disingenuous of me to go ahead and say, yeah, the policies are fine right now without really having to have given them a little bit more critical eye with this study underway. That's actually going to be part of this process, I think, is really seeing if we need to augment the existing policies that we have right now with new policies, or if we just need to go ahead and refine the existing policies that we have.
And would you say that the process is once we got those policies tweaked, or not tweaked, but, you know, we identify what we have to do, when do you think land acquisition or, you know, dealing with partnership with, let's say, private developers or anything else, how far along would that be? What do you think in terms of that when you see it in other cities and other places across the country?
Public-private partnership is critical to have a good TOD system. Other successful systems, like in Salt Lake City or in Phoenix, have done exactly that. That's something that, frankly, should already be taking place. That should be something that the jurisdictions should always be doing, is seeing where the potential arterials are, where there may be opportunities for future TOD, and trying to acquire parcels for those purposes that you just exactly stated.
So, you know, identification, acquisition, partnership, all three of those things should be happening right now.
Well, as far as actually, yeah, the
For
first.
the
steps, as far
acquisition
as
side, we don't have any
acquisition,
money yet.
Right.
We're waiting for that to happen, Mr. Smith, so, hurry up.
Yeah, yeah, the acquisition part, of course, is critical, but that's actually part of the analysis that you would be doing
Right.
Right now and trying to figure out what the most appropriate locations for the station venues would be.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. I guess, they keep looking at us. I guess we didn't
Yeah.
elect a chair or vice chair, so it was funny. When you sit down, you see your name there, you just sit wherever you're sitting, so. I'm not sure if we should, go through the process. I apologize for being late, so.
I had a comment.
Yeah, you can comment all you want, there's no chair.
Thanks, Mike. Wanted to note just real quick, and thanks for the presentation, staff, appreciate it. I think, given what I've heard, it sounds like we almost have a little bit more information that I'd like to see the scope. And Tony, thanks for the kind of the assessment as from the county perspective, because there are so many parts to this. I see this ad hoc committee as kind of the place to kind of where that information can converge. And as we go forward, I mean, this is a grant, right? It's great that we got this. I mean, this doesn't really technically impact our budget other than the time and resources to spend the money. But I think it's a good thing. One quick note, and Lena has copies of a report that was produced out of Jacksonville. I was invited along with a couple of other folks. It was kind of interesting. We did what's called a TAP, a technical advisory panel. It was kind of a two days of just nitty gritty, go into the field, and the objective was TOD assessment of properties. And I'm offering it to you guys just more for reference to kind of show, we had developers, planners, actually Dr. Polzine went up, we were both there. And we basically, for 2 days, we looked at a couple sites, and you had multiple perspectives looking at these properties and the process and JTA's processes and what the challenges were. So I kind of offer this as side reference, if you will. Certainly we're not Jacksonville, but what did come up during the discussions was feasibility of locations. And if you look at, there were 2 sites we looked at. One we determined was feasible, and it was really fascinating how that we arrived at that. Another site was a no-go. Yeah. So I just offer this again for reference, and I would just say that as we move forward, I definitely look forward to getting the scope, and if Tony has kind of some additional information on kind of the status of TOD, whether it's policies or in other situations. One of the big factors as we had our 2-day deliberation, we'll call it, was incentives and the attractiveness of sites for those public-private partnerships. Meaning, if you don't incentivize, whether it's financially or policy, developers to invest, it's not going to happen. So that was one of the bigger challenges, and you'll see that in here. So thank you.
I'd like to call up Kathy Coyle. I'd be interested in hearing, as I see it, and as it was pointed out, it is all through the city. This is corridors that they're studying that are part of this plan. I think this is, first off, extraordinarily important and a big hole in what I have felt like just as a observer that we haven't really dealt with very well in Tampa. And there's so little transit right now in the county that we haven't even had to deal with it in the county. But I've been very concerned about the way that this has moved forward, because I feel like every day I'm seeing us losing opportunities. So there's several things, and one is, how does this coordinate, and anyone can answer this, but so right now we have the BRT arterial study going on in this corridor, but we also have, and these are both FDOT funded studies, we also have the Heights mobility study, and I've been confused, and that's kind of dragged on for a really long time, been confused about, because I think it's essential to me these 2 studies should be coordinated, and I just don't even understand if they are being or how they're being, and I don't know if you can address that or others. I do have some other specific questions for you about this corridor. Did you want to address that, Chris?
I can address the coordination effort between the Heights Mobility and the BRT study. So we have worked closely with DOT on the understanding that the Heights Mobility study has been essentially slowed down for the purpose of having the BRT study getting ramped up, and what comes out of that study is going to essentially inform the height study further on what their needs are. So it's not the heights mobility study isn't necessarily going to be guided by the BRT study, but the BRT study is going to help inform the height study as to where what transit is going to look like in that corridor based on the recommendations that may come out of it, station locations. As part of the BRT study is really a lot of it is focused on connectivity from east and west corridors of other transit connectivity, pedestrian safety at intersections, and recommendations that can be made to make transit move more fluid through that corridor. So that will have a significant impact on what the heights mobility studies final recommendations may be as far as what a cross-section might look like on Florida or Tampa or Islands, and those sorts of things.
So we're going to have the BRT studies results first before we necessarily have recommendations from the heights mobility study?
That is my understanding, yes.
How does that integrate with, as I understand it now moving forward, we're going to have hopefully Jarrett Walker looking at an overall transit redesign. And I know one of the things that is put forward strongly that most American cities haven't done, but the redesigns have done, is the placing of stations, and it was spoken about here, but being typically in the U.S. cities, stations have been placed closer together than is generally probably to push traffic out to move transit more quickly, that they're placed further apart. How is an idea like that being integrated? How is that being integrated then with the transit redesign and looking at that?
Well, it's yet to be seen. It will certainly be evaluated as we look to reopen and reevaluate the comprehensive operations analysis and
Thank you. I didn't know. I couldn't remember what it was called.
Yeah. So
names.
That will be something that we look to as far as recommendations for based on we have internally we have existing bus stop policies as far as bus stop spacing. That's essentially based on if it's rural, it's a little more far spaced. If it's downtown, it's a little closer based on density. And I think it's fair to say those do need to be those policies internally need to be looked at again. And I think that a good opportunity to do that is now in conjunction with having somebody come in and look at the redesign of what our system might look like with our new assumed revenues.
I just wanted to ask some more questions that Kathy Coyle with. I don't know, does that?
It's actually more related to
that?
Chris's comment.
Yeah.
And I do, Commissioner Kemp, I do understand the challenge here. As far as the mission of this committee and how it works with HART and how it interfaces with the city of Tampa, our land use, our land code, and any incentive package to create those partnerships, I'm trying to get an understanding of what we will be able to provide and who we provide it to when we get done with this process, because we do now have a Heights Mobility Project that is being designed in conjunction with the planning department, but through FDOT. So if we come up with standards for transit-oriented development for stops within the city of Tampa, does this committee make a recommendation to HART, that HART then ultimately makes a recommendation to the city to adjust the policy and the code to facilitate these types of stops? And then that drives the mobility study specs, because This study actually runs right in line with the mobility study. I
Yes.
mean, it goes, the mobility study, they overlap each other significantly in phase 2 and 3 of this project, as well as what the Heights Mobility Project is doing. So I'm trying, like you, it's like, who's on first here? Because at the end of the day, whatever is recommended and the city adopts as their policy, and then HART adopts as a partnership framework, is going to drive whatever we end up with, I would assume, in the mobility study. And so that's why I'm trying to make sure we're clear about what our role is, what our recommendations look like, and then to who we request a modification if necessary, either the city of Tampa or, you know, our negotiations with FDOT, with the community of Seminole Heights. It's ground zero for all of this. And I happen to live there, so I have a conflict of, you know.
Yeah.
Now, and so that's, I would say, if you could help sort of timeline that a little bit for me so that I have a better understanding of what our first mission is in this exercise.
So, you know, just to be clear, the BRT study is not, any recommendations that come out of that are not designed to, are in no way meant to or anticipating to guide, any final decisions that will be made in a Heights mobility study. It's simply meant to inform as to what transit will look like in that corridor. They're really separate. You know, the Heights mobility study isn't aimed at transit. I mean, it's a part of it, but it's really more associated with pedestrian and bicycle connectivity and how that works in that community. Transit, this study will simply have an opportunity to inform them with more information as to how transit will move through that study area. It in no way is meant to change their outcome as far as recommending that it end up being any different than what they may have. It's just meant to incorporate and inform and providing more data for them to ensure that their recommendations are meeting all the needs of everything in that area. So
And to that point,
I hope that makes sense.
yes, it does, and it gets to the point that I'm about to make. When we work within the silos, we end up with less effective solutions. And the community that is on ground zero in this has been waiting for years to not die trying to cross Florida and Nebraska, and wants a circulator, or wants transit, and wants walkability in that community. It is critically important that we don't forget that this is, I mean, what we design or what this committee will ultimately recommend to the city and to our planning will play a part in what happens in that mobility study, no matter whether or not it's one and the same. So that's my question. It's like I just need to be clear about what is our ultimate goal and what are we able to impact when we have 3 different levels of studies that are trying to address where we go with this.
I know Mr. Melendez wants to go, but let me just, when I first proposed this years ago and continued to push for a TOD committee, the way I look at it is we make a decision on those TOD options that we have. Because we're going to have money coming in, the traditional BRT look, or the traditional TOD look, excuse me, is to acquire and partner with those folks in order to get land, in order to have development around it. That, when we target that, we're going to do it within our own comprehensive plan through the city, or in some cases in the county, if that's so be it. And we're driving the process. The studies are there only to give us recommendations, if I got Chris's gist of it. So we're going to use the suggestions from the public, from how we deal with our comprehensive plan and build our TOD projects as we go forward. If you look at Cleveland's system, Cleveland has a very robust acquisition office, and they're constantly looking at ways that they can improve their BRT system for TOD purposes. And I think that that's our next goal, because they have money, we didn't have money. So that part of it does not become part of the equation until now. You know, hopefully once all this stuff is settled, we're going to have an ability to say, we want TOD in these sections. Here's how we, where we're going to put the stations, everything else. What is it in the comprehensive plan that we need to change? We go to the city. If the city needs to change it, then of course it goes back to the planning commission and so on. We can prepare before we do those acquisitions in order to go forward. So I think the planning study, the Heights mobility study, all the other studies are all just suggestions on what we can do. We're really the driver of what's going to happen next.
Okay, great, thank you.
At least that's the way I look at it, and I don't know if the other folks.
I have one more quick question, just probably backing up a little bit for my own education. So the Heights mobility study, who's the lead agency on that? Who's paying for it, and is it underway?
Yeah, it's DOT. It's been underway for quite a long time.
Yeah,
Okay, so so is there an intent to combine the BRT study and the TOD grant into one combined scope so that they're being done by the same person, or?
No, not at all.
Okay.
And in fact, we are in the final phases of negotiation for the BRT study at this point, so that wouldn't be feasible. I'm not sure that would be allowed anyway, the way the funding is done. But certainly, the benefit of receiving the grant at this time is this is very timely. We have a lot going on in this corridor, and I think certainly one of the reasons that we received this grant is the recognition that we do have all of this going on in the corridor. In the extension of the streetcar, the BRT study, the Heights mobility study, we have a lot going on, and there's a lot of change that's occurring in the Heights,
Yeah, understood. So doesn't the location of potential transit-oriented development nodes and studying the route that BRT would take, and so if TOD is going to encourage developers to come there and maybe be able to capture a tax increment over a 1/4, 1/2, 3/4 mile area or something to assist in paying for the, say, more enhanced stations. Don't those two things need to be studied together?
What you're talking about is there is a portion of the BRT study in which that will be looked at.
Right.
This pilot program will also look in more detail at that. And I think what is separated, we were careful in the scope of the BRT study was not to get too lost in the TOD discussion. It's very important. It's a critical portion of it. But you run the risk of turning it into a real estate study and spending too much money on evaluating real estate opportunity in the BRT study as opposed to identifying our ultimate goal, and that's how to create BRT in the corridor. This is very fortunate now that we have this grant opportunity because we can.
All right, I'm good. I have two more questions, if you would. Same kind of question, but what date do you expect to choose a vendor for the BRT study, and what date do you expect to choose one for the TRD grant study? We are expecting for the BRT study, I believe we're expecting March board. We are expecting to have a recommendation, I believe. And then I would imagine May or June for, probably more realistically June for the TOD study. Thank you, sir.
I guess David, I think he wanted to go. I interrupted him, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of very briefly just kind of give and this speaks to your question, Commissioner. I see this TOD committee again as a kind of a larger, let's look at the 30,000 foot level, and we have a study and a grant with money, beneath this committee, if you will, or within our purview. And so I look at our discussions as in kind of a general framework, county-wide, but now we have this specific grant, and I want to dial into that for a minute, and the 800,000. And look, and again, we'll look forward to the scope, and we can kind of consider that in more detail. But some key words in the narrative that are provided in the agenda. The goal of the project will be to establish a consistent methodology, and looking at feasible policy and regulatory framework. What this means to me is, this study and the focus of this $800,000 is going to be somewhat agnostic, right? It has, there are two specific studies that are active, but it's going to be looking at, you know, existing regulatory policy and framework, and if folks in the MPO can confirm this, and there's the phrase a viable path. So again, when I participated in that two-day TAP, one of the things that was, and there were MPO members there, and it was interesting to hear the history. They had, and I can almost envision a meeting like this in their past, where the MPO came and they said, you need to change this, or you need to tweak this so that we can move these projects forward. So I guess what I'm getting at is, I think, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess, but part of this $800,000 will be spent to determine what might need to change with the city from a regulatory standpoint, what might need to change, you know, at the MPO, so that the streetcar extension and BRT studies and whatnot can be advanced as those details flush out. So in other words, this is a higher level regulatory and, you know, and policy framework kind of a look, and then which will create that viable path. We don't know how viable that path is yet, but again, I think, and I see Tony nodding his head. I think I'm kind of dialing into it. I'll shut up now. Thanks.
I wanted to call Kathy Coyle because I think, you know, this is, to me, it's really kind of good that we have kind of almost like a model corridor, like a very specific thing to talk about in terms of looking at this and living right off it and crossing also Florida Avenue when I get the one to come downtown right near my house, and having been there for 35 years looking at that and Nebraska avenues and things, I think it's a great opportunity. But I'm wondering about, first of all, and again, I'll be specific, but then there might be other people that have some of the answers to some of this. So as I look at Florida Avenue, as we know, it's exploding with all kinds of development in just the last 5 years that didn't happen before. The used car lots are changing. We're getting apartment buildings up, condominiums up, whatever, and a bunch of restaurants, but a whole bunch more traffic. The road is very narrow, and as I think best practices have been, is to move the development, the line into the roadway to, you know, make the buildings, to make it a sense of a streetscape that wasn't there before. The thing I see though is from downtown to at least like probably about starting at Hannah or Sly, that portion is a pretty narrow roadbed already, and we're talking about mobility, bicycles, transit, cars. Then we're talking in sidewalks, pedestrian walkways. We're moving the buildings in and some of the new development. As it moves out further, I can see lots more opportunity to do the complete streets, to have an actual transit way. But in that narrow part, very busy part, I'm seeing less and less opportunity, even maybe to have like a portion for a transit way or for expanded pedestrian. And I'm very concerned that we're losing those opportunities like week by week by week to get the even slivers of real estate that we might need to put in a narrow station, to put in a bigger pedestrian way. And I'm just wondering if you could, with your role in the city, address that a little, or and I'm wondering also if other places don't have corridor preservation plans, something like, or work that, how it works in with the land use plan. I also know that this is an FDOT road, which complicates it more, but I'm wondering if you can address all of that I just threw out there.
The short segment of Florida that you're speaking of is actually north of Hillsborough, up to Sly. It's only 50 feet by plat, actually. It's very, very narrow. Just to back up a minute on the coordination. So on the Heights Mobility Study, on the Interstate Study, and all the FDOT studies, myself, members of my staff, members of the transportation staff, we all coordinate in internal working groups, as well as HART. just to make sure that we are all aware of all the studies that are going on, and we feed information into each one, and then we'll pull information out that we need for studies that we're doing. So there is that intergovernmental coordination. We don't want to spend money twice if we don't have to, obviously. So, and if FDOT's going to do it first, and if they do what we want them to do, let them spend their money, and we'll move our money to another project. That's the way we look at it. That being said, that particular segment is something that they are looking at in that study as well. It's just narrow. That's what it is. Seminole Heights, and this will feed into the background in this particular study, this grant, looking at the land use policies that exist in the future land use map and the layout of what those do in Seminole Heights, Tampa Heights, throughout those corridors. We already have nodes that were adopted as part of Seminole Heights. And they go up to a half a mile, so, and we changed the map to actually accommodate that in some very large nodes. Florida Avenue was an issue because it's very narrow, and immediately you have single family behind it. So we only had 100 to 120 feet of depth in a lot of those lots for commercial. We did widen them as much as we could through the public hearing process. We got shrunk back on many of those blocks, and that just is what it is. Some of that could be addressed through tweaks to the form-based code we have for Seminole Heights in those smaller segments of certain streets. Now you also have Nebraska, which is 80 foot right away, so it's much larger. You've got a lot more room. But in those smaller segments, and we have a typology from 39 feet all the way to 120 feet for streets. In that 50-foot segment, we could look potentially to tweak those build-to lines to set them back a little bit to create a larger public realm. And those are some of the finer points that hopefully will come out in this type of study. Because we've seen the development a lot sooner than we thought we would. It's happened way quicker than we thought we would, when we thought it would. I mean, we didn't finish.
I didn't think.
We didn't finish the rezoning.
I've been screaming this for 10 years, saying it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, and now
we
it's here.
didn't finish the rezoning until 2013. And so it's only been 5.5 years, and it's blowing up, which is great. I mean, that's really with no economic incentive for the city other than just creating the playground for people to build, which is essentially what the TOD policies do already in the comp plan. It's a floating envelope, there's a map, and once that line is chosen and funded, it drops, and boom, automatically, once those station typologies are laid out, it happens automatically with those increased land use, FARs and densities. So we don't technically have to go out and do map amendments, which saves a lot of time. That's been the plan for 10 years. We, like Mr. Suarez said, we tried in 2013 with a subcommittee because we were doing another alternatives analysis at that point and just didn't get funding. Now we have funding. It's awesome. I can, if I'm allowed to, and I'll pose this to Mr. Smith, I can share some information that I have. As some of you know, I'm on the ULI National Council for TOD. There's only one, and I'm actually a council member on it. And we go twice a year to different cities throughout the country and Canada. And I have information from San Francisco, Vancouver, Charlotte, Chicago. We just went to Detroit in last May. I missed Boston because of some family issues, but I've got them from all over the country. And we walk these sites, and we actually meet the financiers, we meet the local agency folks, we meet the developers, and we walk through the processes they went through and public partnerships that they formed to actually get this stuff done. And the regulatory frameworks they had to set up, because everybody's different, obviously. But it's helped me understand a lot, and I can share some of that with the committee if I'm allowed.
You are certainly allowed to do so. I don't know whether you want to send that through staff so they can help integrate it and organize it, but yes, you may.
Yeah, that'd be terrific.
That'd be great. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I think David wanted to go.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask Kathy some questions. You've answered most of them, but, you know, Mike, when you were talking about acquisition, obviously we're now in a position to do more of that. But we're not going to overlook the incentives, right? We're still going to look at any and all developer kind of incentives to allow for that to happen sort of by evolution. If people want to create a station and it fits within our framework, we should be encouraging that kind of thing, right?
Yes, yes. And the goal behind this too is to create those incentives automatically. So for instance, you could have a community node in Seminole Heights on Nebraska that's a half a mile in radius, and we change the land use categories already within that node to CC 35, which is a, what is it, 2 or 2.5 FAR? 2. If it's a community center station, as a TOD station, you get a 3.0 automatically.
Right.
As long as we change that, we need to tweak that fixed guideway to include that enhanced bus services or however we want to work on it. But that's going to be part of the study, is to create those incentives automatically. And it's those little tweaks where we evaluate each one, where those potential stations, and they work hand in hand. The study for the ridership informs where the uses will be, and the uses that are there, current and potential future, inform the ridership numbers. So we have to balance the two, and then that starts to lay out which alternative is best.
And if I may add to thank you, Catherine. The thing that the trigger, if you will, is the developer's pro forma, and all of those pieces come together, and if that if they're going to make money, they'll invest. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, it does come down to that's the ultimate incentive. And then that fuels everything else. Once they get over that threshold, and so I look forward to the other data, because I'd imagine in those other cities, and you said you talked to the funders, and that's what it comes down to, right? They're not going to move their money unless they're not in this to provide a loss or to take a loss. So
money follows money.
Yeah.
The common theme, I will say, the common theme throughout is for the regulatory framework to be set and basically get out of the way. Remove as many hurdles as possible. So set the land use, set the zoning, set the development code and basic design parameters, and then let people come in, which is essentially what the Seminole Heights Code does, what the Neighborhood Mixed Use Code does in West Tampa. We set that up so that you don't have to go through so many hurdles. You follow the code and you get that enhancement.
So I agree, and I understand Mr. Melendez's 30,000-foot perspective. I think that, because I am a developer and kind of in the weeds on what we're talking about already, in my opinion, that we're fairly far along with these things, as we're talking about today, with the comprehensive land use overlay in place, and that it really, comes down and, to take this to a real-world example. I think at the end of our street, there's an apartment that was recently developed by a developer that's done cool mixed-use urban projects in other cities, throughout the East Coast, and decided they would construct something in Seminole Heights. So, but because of inefficiencies between, if you will, inconsistencies between the underlying zoning and the land use that's already in place, they made a decision to shorten the building 5 feet so that they still have the required retail, but it's weirdly short because they were afraid to go in to change their zoning. And I only point that out as a real world example, but it seems like that this study, the $800,000 that we're fortunate to have, that if it could get a little bit more in the weeds and point out areas where we could maybe catch the zoning up with the concept of, with the very well-written concepts for the TOD and the comprehensive land use, that may be helpful. And I realize that's not formed as a question, so I apologize, but do you agree? Or
it speaks to the finer tweaks that I was talking about before with the build to lines. That particular district allows a 55-foot height, maximum height. The old district that was there before only allowed 45. But it happens to be an intense corridor, and it's within a corridor of one of the neighborhood scale nodes, so it was allowed to bump up to 55 automatically. The missing piece as far as the commercial component is whether or not you want to create some type of incentive for having larger spaces, or larger non-residential spaces, or if you want to mandate a minimum size. Because right now it's silent. As long as you have two distinct separate uses, you're considered mixed use, and we'll let you go in that way. But there's no minimum threshold. So we use our basic market sense when we're looking at those, and someone wants to come in and do a 300 square foot office in this massive apartment complex. the answer is no, we're probably not gonna let that go as true mixed use because it's 300 square feet. But the closest we can get is in our definition for convenience retail or specialty retail, which is 2,000 square feet. It's the only gauge we have in the code. So that might be something that we need to look at is that mixture of two uses enough? Should it be more? Should there be minimum sizes? Should we look at build two lines? And then true that up to the actual corridors and the station types. That's the kind of refinement that I'm hoping for in the third task, which is the regulatory framework and developing the code for it.
All right, so since we're putting this study out to market, hopefully by June, and I guess we're going to see the draft scope for it. I mean, is that something then that the two of you, Tony and Catherine, need to look at to make sure that we're really getting what we need for our $800,000 actionable intelligence, if you will,
I'll leave the final answer to Chris. I would assume because we're signed on as partners that we will be at the table to work on the final project scope and the bid and the interviews of the applicants in the selection process.
Great. Yeah. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. You go.
Thank you. I'm really glad I'm on this on this committee because obviously, as past chair of the chamber for that area, I know intimately the challenges our business owners and our developers have felt trying to develop on that corridor because of the lot land, the setback, and parking requirements and all of the things that make it incredibly difficult to develop in that area. So because we have some conflicts that make it challenging, and you've got a neighborhood that's changing rapidly. As you mentioned, the conditions on Nebraska are quite a bit different than Florida. In addition to that, in a large piece of that area that we're going to be studying, we have a CRA versus an area that we don't. I tried for several years to get a CRA on Florida Avenue because there was so much happening there that we needed some help and we needed some redevelopment resources, and we have brownfields everywhere. Yeah. It's a little challenging. So some of the things we may want to consider is determining or making a recommendation for creating some uniformity in that area that would make it a little easier to create the incentives that we want to see, especially given the constraints. I've been waiting for 2 crosswalks for 3 years, and desperately, frighteningly dangerous intersections that now, with the growth that we've already seen, have become even more urgent. So I understand we've got some wait and see, but every week I call FDOT. Where's my crosswalk? Where's my crosswalk? So it's critically important that we do what we can to accelerate this as much as possible and be sensitive to the community that's been screaming for help in this area for quite a long time.
I know that you volunteered to bring forward, and the committee seems like they're interested in that, and designs from other areas, kind of best practices, what you had said with the ULI. I think it'd be really good for this committee too. I would like to understand exactly what's laid out now, what you said about in terms of set-asides from that were as part of this overlay corridor, what's been done, and what exists now. I think would be a really great thing for us to see and understand, and for the public now that there's a time to kind of get more focus on it. So I think that would be a really valuable piece to bring forward to this committee to look at and understand better.
Thank you, good Commissioner. Just a quick comment to second your concern, Commissioner Oberman. When we were looking at these sites up in Jacksonville, one of the key components was you're going to build a station. People aren't going to park there, right? They're going to walk and they're going to bike, right? Generally, and it was so critical. Now, and it might not have been on the ground that day, and Mike was pointing out one of the facilities that was near actually the site that we said, keep looking at this site. It was a facility of questionable, whatever, but
it was a gentleman's club. You can be open about it. It's all right. Little did we know you could visit that often to make
Yeah.
sure that you got it right.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
But we got off the bus. We traveled to this site, and we get off the bus, and that was the first thing we saw. We're like, oh boy, and there was this deflated feeling of like, what are we doing here, right?
Yeah.
Because we went back, and I basically told the group, I said, we have to put on our 30-year planner hats right now, and I think that's what we have to do as well. And to your point, back to safety, you know, I think that component of this is incredible in terms of, you know, increased communication between interagency and then and us helping to facilitate that. And one quick comment, I'm very encouraged that Catherine, it sounds like you have that experience with the developers, because I was thinking, you know, as far as the concerns and policy concerns that Adam brought up, because I was thinking, and you know, should we have some kind of a charrette where we bring the development community in? But you probably have been in the trenches and heard of all of their, you know, all their concerns and have been through that. So it's great to hear that you'll be involved in this process. That encourages me that we, you know, that's going to be accounted for without maybe having a charrette or some type of, you know, interactive thing.
And that
Yeah.
public outreach, Chris mentioned, that public outreach is going to happen
Oh, good.
extensively through this process as
Excellent.
well.
So you'll be talking to the developers and the
Yes, and the
Adam
community.
Gardens, okay, and the community. Great.
And the great news is that the more we work to make it a true TOD type of plan, the more developers we're going to get that are interested in TOD. The problem is that right now, developers build to the plan. There are very few that are going to be visionary because, you know, listen, they can't get the kind of dollars. And I'm saying this when I've got a developer and a land use attorney next to me over here. You know, it really is about how much you can make based on what the comprehensive plan says in different parts of the city. And, you know, transit is not even a part of their thinking. And it's because we don't have, you know, the kind of driven facility to do this. And I think that now with HART being really going to be the controlling factor in this, the city is going to be a good partner, I believe, so that we can figure out how do we make TOD actually work in these corridors so that we're not just spinning our wheels, excuse the pun, you know, so that we can get this thing off the ground and get going. Because when we talked about this in 2013 or 2012, really there was very little that we could do from our side at HART. You know, and when you don't have the money to get to actually use as leverage to get more developers in there, and when you don't have developers that are interested in to begin with, you're never going to get that process going. I mean, all the successful TODs that you see along transit corridors, you have very strong transit, agencies that are there that are facilitating a lot of that and making sure that all that stuff comes, you know, hand in glove. I mean, you know, and I know you've seen it in all those other places that you visited. I think you visited San Diego too, didn't you? Okay. She didn't want to say about the really nice places she's been. She mentioned Detroit. Anyway, so, and you know.
Detroit wasn't bad.
Yeah, Detroit's not bad. I'm just kidding. But, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, all those things are together. It's not separate. But the agency usually is the driver for it because of the way that the corridors work and how the frequencies are and what's going to mean for the station itself, and then bring the developers in and say, how is this going to affect a quarter-mile radius around that particular station? It's got to have that frequency. It's got to have that knowability. It's got to have that, quickness so that we can get people to and from, and then all those developers will come knocking at our door. At least that's the way I believe it.
The other thing I would offer too, the reality is we need to, and Mr. Harden mentioned one of the developers on Florida that does things nationally. We will have to attract bigger developers, more national and international developers. It's not, some of the development and redevelopment is going to happen from smaller local firms, but we need to entice and market to a bigger community. Detroit in particular, a lot of that has happened because they have two huge benefactors to that, Union Loans and Little Caesars.
Yep.
And they have spent so much money and have so many employees and have so much built into that city to revitalize it. But there's still a lot of derelict properties up and down that new line. It is what it is.
But Kathy, that is also a part of the incentive for TOD, because now you have derelict properties that are empty that developers can see along that corridor that says, we're going to go ahead and develop it. We have a little bit of a different problem, as Tony mentioned. We don't have a lot of larger parcels. We have a lot of smaller parcels, but there's a lot of them along Florida Avenue in Nebraska and some other places. And we're talking only about the north-south, but this is about the entire county too. The plan, this particular planning grant is different. It's not just for, one section. We're talking about one section. But the east-west too, we need to talk about, because the more we're able to develop a true grid, the better we're going to be able to provide the kind of services we need for most people. And that's a key to it. It doesn't hurt that we've got a good development up in the north downtown area in Tampa Heights. It doesn't hurt that we've got another development in the Channelside area, and both of them are going to be touched by the streetcar. I think that's a big part of it. But he's a pioneer, and did it without us having dollars to provide them and to help them and to do everything else. And he's doing, I think, okay over there, right, Adam?
Oh, thank you. We're trying.
If I could, I'm thinking about this the other way, not in terms of doing this to get transit-oriented development. In fact, I think we have the development in place, the people, and we have to be moving people, and we have constrained roads because of our development. And we have to be figuring out how to make those areas walkable. That it's great. The infill, I just feel like all that will come because we've got funding now for a transit system that we can make that transition from using our roads as our only means to moving people with transit, and that. We are already getting the densities. We already have the constrained roads. What we have to do is make nice, walkable places that people can get frequent transit, that they don't have to rely on a second car or maybe a first car, that we can do that, and the development comes. So I guess I'm thinking of it the other way around. I'm not thinking about doing this to attract transit-oriented development. To me, that happens on its own. Because they see that as desirable when you have good transit, and we already have, in some places quite a bit of density in the older parts of the city in terms of what we can do. So, I'm looking at building a good transit system with good walkable stations. 80% of people walk to transit, and a good walkable community that makes transit accessible and frequent.
The true design of that happens in the design phase, once the line's chosen and through acquisitions. This is the very beginning of trying to set that vision of what it's actually going to be, because the alternatives analyses are still happening and exactly where those stations are going to land. And that true design of what those sidewalks should be, bike lanes, or how the shelters and the rest of it are going to work, and any road redesigns, that does happen later. What you want to make sure in the beginning is to inform the study. The goal of the study is to make sure that we incorporate all of those needs once we get to the design. Because if we don't spell that out now, it won't carry through, and they're FDOT roads, quite frankly. The only way they're going to do what we want them to do is if it's in an adopted plan. So we need to get it in an adopted plan.
So
one of the just to throw an interesting quirk that's not in this conversation. And we're developing our policies on how we're going to develop the urban core that's going to facilitate transit. And what I'm not hearing, which I'm very aware of, being past involved with the chamber and the businesses in that area, as it becomes more walkable, what we've seen in the way of real estate values spike in the Seminole Heights area, and it's because people want to live there. But the business owners that are on these corridors are now finding that their employees are having to move to New Tampa and other places because there's no way that their employees in these businesses can afford to live in the community anymore. So in our incentive or our public-private partnerships, if it involves residential or mixed use, so that residential is in part of it, we need to have a component of policy that it considers making sure that there's affordable housing in this process. Because if we don't, when you create attractive areas, values get to the point where if people are only able to rent You know, they're not protected from the rising drive of the great investment that we're going to see in this community, and they ultimately won't be able to live there. So while they may use transit to get there, if it goes far enough out, that doesn't apply to the streetcar, you know, and it might apply to Fowler, but it doesn't get them anywhere else. So I think it's critically important that we not forget that whatever either development code or investment or incentive or public-private partnership, that we incorporate some kind of mechanism to allow for affordable housing in that area, or an allocation that's reasonable.
If I may, and I saw a real-life example, or heard about a real-life example of that when I was at APTA, because I met transit officials from all over the country, and out in California there was one, and we were just chatting over lunch, and she said, yeah, we're almost a victim of our own success, because there were some areas where the development occurred and the rates were so high for rent, everybody that wanted to ride transit had to leave. Mm-hmm. It was an unfortunate result, so I think that's a fair point, and that goes back to the pro forma and and to dollars, and how do you provide, how do you make that work? And I think that sounds like it's going to be one of the challenges that has to be accounted for in this. So.
Yeah, and I will tell you, Commissioner, Minneapolis-St. Paul did that specifically along the Green Line. They made a plan specifically about affordable housing in relation to transportation. It is not just, transit isn't just transit. Transit is, and this is why TOD is just a catalyst. It's not the only reason we do these things. I mean, we obviously have not had the role in development the same way that other agencies had. The role we have is to make sure that those lines not only are on the most used corridors, but also that they partner with us and with the city and with the county to make sure that there is affordable housing in there. If you have frequent, knowable transit, you make it easier for developers to come on in and to decide. And if you own the land and you lease it to a developer, those dollars can go back into providing the operating funds to go forward. That's what TOD is supposed to do. But it also helps to bring down some of those prices too, so that people can live there. And we may have density now, but it's not the kind of density that you see in other cities. And that may happen, and that may change, and that's part of the whole process. I mean, Adam's project in Tampa Heights, that's building up density in a place where there was not a lot of density. And it's become successful, and it's not even completed, not even done yet. It's become a pretty successful project. Those are the kind of things that we're going to have to look at. Now, we keep, this is just one point of the sword, essentially. It's not the whole thing.
Part of some of the things that I'll send you include some of those best practices for affordable housing, inclusionary zoning, and things like that. The one that popped to my mind, and keep in mind, we're not alone. It's a problem all over the world with gentrification. And no one has truly solved it, but there are best practices.
Sure.
San Francisco, for instance, we went to a building that was between Mission and Market, and the brand new bus transit center was right across the street. Beautiful building. We toured the condos. We were way high up. The condo we were touring, they didn't tell us how much it cost until we went through it. It was $1,492 a foot.
Can you say that again?
$1,492 per square foot.
Wow.
For this unit that we were in, which was not much bigger than this room. They mandated through that district that every developer that comes in provides 10% of their units as affordable.
Right.
Now, we're in a totally different world from San Francisco, and the building that was affordable was on the same parcel. It was a 7 or 8 story building, had all the nice amenities. It was nowhere near the last tower the other one was, but there were 4,000 applicants as soon as they announced it, and there are 70 units.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's the issue. It's mandated. If you, in most of the places we've been to, it's a mandate. There has to be a percentage of it, and then there's ways to do it. So far in Tampa, we've only had it as voluntary for bonus. It just depends. I mean, our numbers are nowhere near.
But just to be clear, these are county and city policies. These are not transit agency policies, because I feel like there's thought here that somehow the transit agency can drive this. And
No, but part of this study is the regulatory framework.
Well,
Yeah, well, the regulatory, don't misconstrue what I'm saying, okay?
I mean, I
just want you to make sure you know that when you look at TOD design in other cities, the transit agency has an incredibly important role in this. It is not just, the city tells you what your comprehensive plan is. How many times have you told me on council that it's our comprehensive plan from the city council? But we don't have a partner with HART yet because HART has not been interested in TOD. I mean, that's the whole point. Now we are interested in TOD. Now we are going to have dollars to provide to make sure that we give incentives to those developers that want to have it and be able to transform not only the development of places along that corridor, but to transform transit itself. So they go hand in glove. It's not a matter of one versus the other. I think it's in cooperation. And I think that, as Kathy mentioned a moment ago, she is involved in all these studies because they have to be part of it. I mean, Chris knows, Tony, and Tony knows, Kathy, and they all get together and they know what they're doing in terms of each one of those studies. I think that sometimes we lose sight of that. Not you, but I mean other people outside of this room that have a tendency to say, why you got all these studies and nothing's getting done? Well, actually, things are getting done. It just doesn't go really quickly. That's the only problem, so.
May I? And I think this goes back to what I've been trying to focus on, which is the scope and deliverables. So, I guess we've been entrusted with this $800,000 to spend on this grant, and that we probably are on second base with TOD. We have what I think is a pretty robust set of policies through the comprehensive plan. I believe we've touched on a few of the issues today, like the fact that affordable housing is a bonus provision and not a requirement. And I think we talked about the fact that there's kind of a disconnect in some locations in the city between zoning and land use, where you still, as a developer, can't count on being able to make an investment and being able to develop transit-oriented density. I understand as a neighbor of Pat and a resident of Seminole Heights, I do understand her concerns, but with regards to density and what we're trying to create, I would only reframe that to say, that a regional transit station, which I would assume there would be one or two near Seminole Heights, really is going to start with density, I think, around 60 and cascade out. That's like an urban multifamily vertically integrated mixed use form, cascade out to maybe 30, which is more of an urban townhome form, and then down to 12, and then down ultimately to the 5 or 6, which are representative of the existing neighborhoods. Those are big decisions, but you can look at sites like, the dog track, which I can't say it's up for sale or development or anything, but it's certainly a large blighted parcel that keeps a neighborhood down, in my opinion. So, I think that as we look at, especially Florida from MLK to downtown, and Nebraska really from Martin Luther King north, that there's a surprising number of large tracts of land. And, closer to my personal home, I think that some of these inefficiencies with regards to the land use and or the zoning not going to the back of some of the blocks will result in the car lots never being displaced. Right. So that's just bottom line. So we can like it or not like it, and my neighbors can disagree with me, but highest and best use is that. It's highest and best use. And right now we see that the highest and best use of a lot of this property is car lots with fences built to the blind corner so that you have to pull out, look, and then back up until you can turn right. So it's frustrating, but it would be nice to see the deliverables here. The three of y'all kind of polish this diamond, that we use this $800,000 to the best benefit. And, I think the outcome should be, twofold. I would add some clarity to the deliverables. I see, that I could infer what I want here: an analysis report of the viability of existing development regulations regarding TOD, creation of a regulatory framework which promotes market-based development. So, but I think more specifically is that the elected officials at both the city and the county, as you seek to capture the value that's created by transit-oriented development, understanding that we have a large budget now for capital improvements to construct a facility, but it's also going to need to be run. And the and, you know, coming out of this with a deliverable that can say, here's the lift if we do this, you know, this potential regional station. You know, and if a portion of that increase in the ad valorem tax value goes back into the operation and maintenance long-term of this infrastructure we're putting in, then essentially the developer is coming in here is, you know, making money for the city and the county, you know, and these improve, but also a portion of this is being captured to fund the system that encouraged that company to come there and to undertake the development. So I think that this, you know, deliverable needs to have that level of detail. In addition, you know, to getting down into the nitty-gritty of what are the inefficiencies between, you know, the tweaks that we need to the existing comprehensive land use plan, which again, I don't believe are major, and the ways that the existing zonings can catch up to the land use so that every development which meets the requirements of the comprehensive future land use plan doesn't need to go to a detailed public study. I mean, I think we know that properly written form-based codes are highly effective. So,
Okay.
Anyway.
If I may, I think we've talked a lot about this. I would suggest that Mr. Smith, I didn't realize that we did not do an election of officers beforehand. So if it's okay, I think maybe you probably should go ahead and run that so that we can get a chair and vice chair.
That's fine. Just as a preparatory gratuitous aside, if I could, this is an impressive composition for this committee. I look for great things to come from it. I think it offers a lot. We need to open up the floor for nominations for the chair, so I will do so. Do I hear any nominations for the chair of this committee?
Yeah, I'll nominate David Mechanic as the chair.
Okay, nomination of David Mechanic for the chair. Are there any further nominations? Not hearing any, we close the nominations. I assume we will just go ahead and vote to affirm. David Mechanic will be your chair. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You have your chair. Open the floor for nominations for vice chair.
Pat Kemp. Pat Kemp.
Yep.
Okay. We have Pat Kemp nominated for vice chair. Are there any further nominations? Not hearing any, the nominations are closed. All in favor of Pat Kemp as vice chair, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That's it. We're done. We now have a chair and a vice chair.
Okay. All right, Chair, you want to take over?
Okay.
Do your thing.
We are, I think, finished with the presentations. Do we have a CEO Director Officers report?
No, there is no report today, but I would ask this committee and the chair if you would consider at what frequency this committee would like to meet and maybe establish that.
Okay. I think we should probably hear when the next product from the study is going to occur. Is Chris here? Oh, yeah.
So the next steps for this project, we will get together in the next couple of weeks as a team, the four of us, MPO, Commission, County Commission, the city, and HART, and we will begin hashing out a plan, developing a scope of work that will go out on the street, and you know, I'm actually thinking more realistic, that probably June committee, maybe July board. That would probably be more realistic for the acceptance of a contract for this project. So maybe.
I mean, this seems like a very proactive committee here, so I'm getting the feeling that maybe June is too long.
I'd like to make a suggestion that we just meet every other month.
Okay.
And then if we see that we need more or less or whatever, that we proceed from there.
So I guess the last Monday of March would be our next meeting then? Is that what you're thinking? Because I mean, obviously we're at the end of January. That sounding good? Mm-hmm. What do you think, Chair?
Just a quick point, just as far as the order of things. Given how much we discussed all the details today in the scope, do we want to have a look at the scope before it goes out?
Yeah,
I
was just going to ask the same thing. So.
My gut tells me, not to question staff, but just to, I think that could be a healthy thing for the process.
So can you circulate that?
Certainly.
Have staff circulate.
So we can shoot to have at least a draft of what our scope will look like to the best of our abilities the next time we meet, and we can begin getting some feedback.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, please send these things in advance of the meeting so we can have a chance to look it over ahead of time. Thank you.
Apologize you didn't get that this time.
Yeah.
We'll have it again.
Okay, so the plan would be to meet every other month, and Ruthie, you'll sort out what those dates are and
Yes,
circulate a
absolutely.
email on that.
Sure.
Thank you. Chair's report. Well, I've been on the job a total of 4.5 years here, so I don't
Tell
really
us all
have
about
a
it.
report.
So are you good with the job?
Great job.
You didn't say no, so.
You're doing great
I
so
think
far.
that's an adjournment.
Right. Any other business to be brought up today? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.